This is International Master Eric Kislik, and today I'll be answering the question, what is the best defense to d4? You might be wondering, how do I even think about that? Well, I have a very clear way of classifying what would make something the best opening against d4. If there was some opening that all of the top players in the world played with black against d4, and if there was some opening that had multiple ways to equalize against every white try, then that would undoubtedly be the best defense to d4. Do you know what that might be? That opening is the Nimzo-Indian Defense. There is no other opening with black against d4 that's played by every player in the top 50. You might think, oh, well, what about the Queen's Gambit to Klein Ragozin? Nope. What about the Gruenfelds? Good guess, but no, only the Nimzo-Indian. So we should really take a look at this and try to think about what is the underlying logic behind the Nimzo-Indian and why is it so good. So I'll start with the basic moves. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, and now bishop to b4. So the fundamental point is that when black plays bishop to b4, he's preventing white from advancing in the center with e4 and building up a huge center. So let's look at what are the main moves for white here. I believe the main moves for white are to play either e3 and develop with bishop d3 and knight f3, or to simply play queen c2. And that is the case, as we see here. The two main moves overwhelmingly are to play e3 or queen c2. So let's take a look at e3 first. So after the move e3, I have a simple way of playing. Let's castle after bishop to d3. So white's main plan is to go bishop d3, knight f3, castle, and he's sort of just sitting and waiting while developing to see what black is going to do. So I go d5, and what this does is I establish a stronghold in the center. What that means is that I have a pawn planted in the center that's not easy to drive away. I'm not planning to let go of that stronghold unless I have a very good reason. I'm stopping white from playing e4 and simply making it difficult for him to find a plan, and you'll see this in the main line as well. So white's main move is to play knight f3, and let's just look in the reference here to see what are the most common moves played for black here. So the main move is to play c5, then there's b6, which both of these moves score pretty well for black. There's also d takes c4. So as we can see, multiple moves for black here on move 6 that all score pretty well. So let's go into b6, and as you can see, b6 was played by Mirosevic, Carlsen, Karyakin, the list goes on, played by many very good players. So let's take a look at b6. So we go b6, and our plan is a simple development, bishop to b7, and we might follow up with simply knight bd7. So he castles, we go bishop to b7, c takes d5. This is the main move. There are, of course, other moves, but I'm just illustrating the main line, the most common line. So e takes d5, and now a3. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to take on c3 here and simply give white the bishop pair for not so much. I don't think we would get so much compensation for it here, but if we simply drop back with bishop d6, now we have good control over the center, and we're sort of leaving the ball in white's court because he needs to come up with a plan. Playing e4 is not going to be realistic in the near future. So white plays the move b4, and his general plan is to go queen b3 and a4, and maybe go a5 and gain space on the queen side. So a simple move for black is the move a6, and what we're doing is we're stopping knight b5 in any variations to attack the d6 bishop, and we're planning simple development like queen e7 and rook e8, useful moves, and we're kind of seeing what white's doing. So for instance, queen b3 prepares a4, I go queen e7, so I'm attacking that b4 pawn there and making it harder for white to go a4 and a5 to gain space on the queen side. So the main move for white is to go rook ab1, and now I simply wait with rook e8, and the point here, which is quite nice, is that if a4, now rather than going knight bd7, which is still not a bad move, I can play the move knight c6, which is quite nice. So I'm hitting the b4 pawn, and now if he goes b5, I can play knight a5, but I can also just simply play knight to b4. So my knight has a very good outpost square, and I've already fully equalized. And what have I done with black? Really nothing special, just simple development, and I already have no problems at all. So it's easy to see from this one simple line that we already have 3 or 4 equalizers already in multiple different spots of this line. So it just illustrates how fundamentally hard it is for white to obtain an advantage in this e3 variation. Let's go back to the move queen c2 on move 4, which also has a very principled point behind it. So the move queen c2, what he's planning to do is go a3, bishop takes c3 check, queen takes c3. So what he wants to do is have the bishop pair with white and then simply develop and basically try to say, well, I have a healthy pawn structure, I have the bishop pair, which is generally worth about half a pawn, and I'm going to leave it in black's hands to try to get some activity. So what we can do with black is we can castle, and what we'd like to do generally is go b6, bishop b7, and simply put all of our pieces on good squares, play very actively, and if white tries to go e4 here, we can play the move d5 and strike back at the center right away. That's an important point. We want to make sure we can always strike back if white goes e4. So a3. So now we're okay with giving up the bishop pair here because we have the move b6. So bishop g5 is the main move, pinning the knight, and now I play bishop to b7. So I'm still controlling this e4 square here and making it difficult for white to find any clear plan to make progress. So white goes e3. This is the main move. The general plan is to go queen c2, knight to e2, and knight to c3. So basically just complete development calmly, try to play with a better structure, try to claim the bishop pair gives him an advantage. So here I'll just go d6, which is a very calm move. I have multiple pawn breaks in the center. I can try to go for e5, for d5, or for c5, but in this case the simplest way to play is just to go knight b d7 and then try to go c5. So let's look at this. Knight e2, knight b to d7. So as we can see, all of black's pieces, minor pieces, have been developed to natural squares. Now we just need to come up with something for the heavy pieces and then we'll be all set. So white goes queen c2 and now c5. So rook d1 is a natural move, trying to use the rook on the file that's about to open up pretty soon. I simply go queen c7. You could also go queen e7. There are a bunch of good moves here, but I'm just illustrating one simple way to play. So after the move knight c3, I can simply play a6, stopping knight to b5. So queen d2 is a pretty good move, trying to keep some pressure down the d file. And now I have a pretty easy plan I want to play with black. Now I want to play d5. And I'm basically playing against the bishop on f1 and the rook on h1, which currently are not in play. So you'll see here, after c takes d5, I simply go knight takes d5. And now let's say if white goes f3, now I can just go c4. And I've gained space on the queen side. So now I have ideas like going b5 and gaining more and more space there, while at the same time, white is having a hard time developing. So this is exactly what black's whole strategy was based on. I'll give him the bishop pair, sure, but I'm going to have very dynamic play. And I'm either going to strike back in the center, or I'm going to get nice active play on the queen side. So let's say white goes rook c1 to keep an eye on the c4 pawn. I'll simply go b5. If knight takes d5, if he goes b3, I'll just put a knight on b6, keep everything nice and solid. If knight takes d5, I go e takes d5. Here's a good moment to kind of pause and just look at the outcome of the opening. So if we look at this position, yes, white still has the bishop pair, but the bishop on g5 is undefended. That might not matter in a specific variation, but black can go rook e8, he can go queen d6, he can go a5 and b4 and gain space on the queen side. He has all this activity and he's still restrained white from playing e4. So even at this point, white has no really clear plan, while black has this plan of playing a5, b4 on the queen side after preparing it. So black builds up quite a good position. So as you can see here, nice dynamic play for black in every single variation, and in many cases with multiple side variation equalizers. So it's really ideal. It kind of suits any player's style. If you want to play aggressively, you can play aggressively. If you want to play solidly and positionally, you can do that as well. And the thing is, I'm not really biased about this at all. I would be happy to recommend any opening if it was played by every player in the top 50 in the world. It really doesn't matter to me what opening that is, as long as I have evidence of it. And in this case, it's really only the Nimzo-Indian Defense. And the amazing thing about it is that there are so many ways you can play it, so it suits any player's playing style. And most of the positions you're going to be playing in the opening in the Nimzo are not very vulnerable. So basically, you'll be playing a position that's very close to equal, even if you play the second, third, or fourth best move, which is very rare. For instance, if you play the Dutch with black, you may end up in some positions where if you don't play the best move, you might end up lost or significantly worse. So there's certain openings where you have to be really careful, but the nice thing about the Nimzo is that it's not such a vulnerable opening. So in many cases, playing the second or third best move, as long as you play something active, you control the center, you're generally going to have pretty good positions. So you might be wondering, well, okay, so I see that against Queen C2 and E3 we have nice dynamic positions, but what happens if white doesn't play Knight C3? Do we have a consistent and dynamic way to play against Knight F3 or G3? Is there something consistent so we don't have to just play something that doesn't fit with the repertoire at all? Isn't there something we can do that's consistent? Yes, there is. So if Knight to F3, one thing which is very common nowadays is playing D5, Knight to C3, and Bishop to B4. And actually, in some rather funny variations, white can go E3 and Bishop D3 and transpose right back into the E3 Nimzo. So this is about as close as you can get to a transposition to the Nimzo against Knight to F3. And what I can recommend if white plays G3 is this common variation that's being played against the Catalan nowadays, which is Bishop to B4 check. And then after Bishop to D2, which is the main move, we simply drop back with Bishop E7. And now our general plan of developing is to go D5, castle, well, castle first usually, then D5, then C6, then B6. Then we can bring our bishop out to B7 or A6 and generally Knight BD7. So this has been a pretty stable equalizing system for black against the Catalan, and so it's very interesting that Bishop B4 is such a useful move in all of these variations. But what we've been able to establish is that the Nimzo-Indian Defense is really unique in the fact that so many strong players play it, practically, well, everybody in the top 50 plays it. There are multiple ways to equalize against every main system for white. And one point which is really worth keeping in mind is that Garry Kasparov said that the Nimzo-Indian is one of the very few openings that's so dynamic, that features you playing so many different pawn structures, that you learn so much about chess when you're a developing player. So it's kind of in a league of its own. It's not just trying to play solidly, play the same pawn structures every single game. As we can see in these variations that we looked at, black has the option of playing 4 or 5 different pawn structures. You have such a broad and interesting choice, and that's one of the great joys of the Nimzo-Indian. So I hope you make Garry Kasparov happy and play the Nimzo-Indian Defense.